metric or the British type threads. And so you're going to see the national coarse, national fine, and then metric. So it's nearly a forgotten art, you know, but in my opinion, it does add value to an item. If it's threaded, it shows that you care a little bit more maybe than just pressing the lids together, even though they may be a tight fit and pop when you pull them apart. It's also something if you're looking for some type of security when putting the two pieces together, you can do the threads. But really my main reason for learning, trying to learn or doing threading was I found it was a challenge. You know, a lot of people don't do it. I'm going to try it. I don't care if it works or not. I put it off for years for the price of tools, but I finally said to heck with that and made the jump and got the tools and tried it. So it's really just having the challenge out there and saying, I can do that. Can you? All right, next one. So just some nomenclature that we'll use when we talk about threading, and some of this is old hat to everybody who's a basic handyman or doing any work, but we'll talk about pitch. The pitch is the distance between a same point on the threading, whether it's from peak to peak or middle of the slope to the middle of the slope, but the distance between those is the pitch of the thread. In US standards, it's measured in inches. It'd be in millimeters if it's in the metric. So if I measure an inch and I count the number of threads in that, you get threads per inch. And so, you know, if you do 1 inch and you count 20 of those peaks, then you're doing a 20 thread per inch chase. So another little bit of nomenclature. We'll talk about the crest of the thread. The crest of the thread is the peak, whether it's the internal thread with the female or the external thread with the male. Either one of them, the peak of those threads is called the crest. The other thing to notice about that picture is you'll see that both of them are introduced with a chamfer. When you look at any screw or you look at a nut, you're going to see a chamfer on the end. That helps guide it in and get things started with a partial thread. The other thing you'll notice is that before it reaches the shoulder, there's a recess that's cut. There's a recess that's cut right here, and there's a recess that's cut right there. That recess, unless you're really quick with your hands, is there so that you can get the tool in and you can get the tool out before you hit that shoulder. If you're running your chasing tool through there and you hit the shoulder, chances are you screw up the threads you've been cutting. But if you got that recess, you can move your tool across, pull it out before you hit. So I put this in there because every time I go to Home Depot or Lowe's and I try to pick out a thread and I'm going, Jesus, how many threads are there, you know? So the nomenclature that you're going to find, and this doesn't really have anything to do with my demo, but I found it interesting, so I wanted to put it into a slide. But the first number is related to the major diameter of the thread that you're going to cut. Now the thing with, and I say unified threads, and with that's your national coarse, national fine, just standard US threads. Anything less than 1/4 of an inch is designated by a number, right, Ken? Ken's my machinist. Anything less than 1/4 is designated by a number 1 through 10 for threads less than 1/4 of an inch. And all this is in a chart. If you really want to get into it, you can find the number, given a thread number, the diameter, it'll tell you how many threads per inch, and they vary. You know, you'd think that national coarse is 16 threads per inch. They're not. The smaller the bolt, the finer the threads. The bigger the bolt, the higher the pitch. So the first number there is designating the diameter, and in either numbers 1 through 10 or in 1/4 inches up to as big a bolt as you can get. The second number is the actual threads per inch. So like the number 440 is a number 4 diameter, 40 threads per inch. The 1/4 inch is a 20 threads per inch. Of course, once you get a handle on that, then you go to the metric and you start looking. The British people, they're doing it in millimeters, so it's a 3 millimeter. And the thread is not threads per inch, it's actually 0.5 millimeters between each pitch. So things to keep in mind when you go to Home Depot and you start looking for threads. Now, see, when you start chasing threads, It's how quick you can move the tool in and move the tool out without hitting something. And so if you're cutting 5 threads per inch, you can imagine your tool is going pretty darn fast. If you're cutting 16 threads per inch, your tool's not going as fast. So if you're getting 4 revolutions a second, it doesn't move as far when you're cutting 16 as 20. That's what this slide is supposed to show you, is that when you're down here and you're cutting 10 threads per inch and you're going for 1 second, if you're up there chasing threads and you're 1 second, you're going to move, depending on whether you're 250, 320, or 400 RPM, you can be moving up almost 7/10 of an inch in 1 second with 10 threads per inch. If you go to 15, 16, you're only moving about 4/10, and then if you go to 20, it's less. And you can get the feel for that. The more threads per inch, the slower your tool's going to move across. So the 2 things to keep in mind. One is the threads per inch that you want, the RPM you're going to turn, and typically I have a 16 thread per inch cutter. That's what we'll do tonight. I usually turn around 300 RPM because then I can move that tool in fast enough. You're not cutting an inch of threads in most boxes, right? I mean, if you look at how much overlap you've got there, you probably got 1/4 inch, maybe 3/8 of an inch or something like that. So you got to be pretty darn quick to get in, getting out. No slowness here. So I just say that threads per inch determines how fast you're going to turn. We're going to be turning about 300 RPM, maybe a little bit less. The higher the RPM, the cleaner the cut. Gentleman was asking me about cutting some 5 threads per inch and bigger threads. You can do that, but you're going to be cutting pretty slow, and unless you got really good wood, it's going to chip out on you. So no magic RPM, depends how fast you can move it. So, if you want to develop some muscle memory before you start doing it, and you want to practice on scrap, or you can get a 3/8 inch bolt, chuck it up, start using that to, practice getting your momentum, getting your muscles trained to go. It's got a 16 thread per inch with a 3/8 bolts national course. So that'll just help you develop your rhythm if you want to practice. So materials, most any hardwood works good. If it cuts good with a scraper, you can usually cut threads in it because that's all a threading chaser is. It's nothing but a scraping tool. Once you cut the thread, you can use super glue to add stability. I will say that if you add super glue, spray it with your accelerator to make sure it's set. Don't get too much of a rush, because if it's not set and you screw the other lid on, you've got a lidded urn. It's set. It's not coming out. Acrylics work great. I do some practice in PVC. PVC is an inexpensive way to practice and chase some threads, and it works fantastic. I don't know, the brochures say that side grain works better than in grain, so that segmented turning works good. I have tried it both side and end. I can't really tell a difference. I turn and practice in a variety of woods. Cherry to me works great. Walnut works good. And if you can work in the exotics and something like cocobolo or any of those hardwoods, they'll spoil it. But the price you pay for that, I tend to work in wood that's cheap or free. So there's some workarounds. If you don't want to do hand chasing, you can go with the brass inserts. The only problem there is they do cost an arm and a leg, but the nice thing about them, it makes it very easy to align your grain. You can screw them together, and if it doesn't quite match up to where you wanted to, then you simply move that insert before you super glue it in, and you're ready to go. I do these. I do PVC from Home Depot. I don't do a lot of them because they're very limited in size that you can put in there, but I did turn one of my first urns, and I wanted it to seal, so I used, and I didn't do threading at that time, I did use the PVC, and you can see that it works beautifully. You get one for the male, one for the female, cut them off, glue them into your piece. If you screw them on and you're not going to be taking it off, looking at that PVC, it works great. So, or you can make your own inserts. I mean, if you've got a piece of wood and you're turning it and it doesn't thread real well, I mean, use some exotic wood and make a small insert and use that for threading. So you can also use taps and dies. I know you guys say you don't do threading, but how many of you have that tap that's in that upper right-hand corner? Barry, you got one. You got one. Yeah, Tom, I have one back here too that, if you make your own face plates, or you can use a wooden block to make any kind of glue on that you want, those work fantastic. You can see the picture in the bottom there. You just take a piece of wood, drill it out, run that tap through there, and you can screw it right onto your headstock and go. Only problem with most of these is that limited in size and rather costly if you're going to do a variety of sizes. So, there's a variety of brands out there for doing your chasing. I happen to have the Carter in the upper left. Watched one of the videos online and said, hey, I like that. The other ones are down here. Carter makes theirs both male and female, just flip them around. Sorby's down here, they got their separate tools. But you end up with two cutters. One is the male, one is the female. Female here on the right, male on the left. So you're asking about chasing threads too. You can do it with power. If you do it with power, it's much cleaner. You can do most any wood and it's very consistent. The only thing is it's pretty darn expensive to get started. You can get designs online that says how to make your own threading machines. It's nothing more than a high-speed cutter going in the headstock and you're screwing it in with whatever thread you want, whether it's 8, 16, or any thread pitch that you like. So the other tools you'll need would be a tool to cut the recess for the female threads. Female threads cut in there, but at the back of it, I have to cut that recess before I hit the shoulder. So you got to get in there. You can buy those tools, or you can just take an Allen wrench, grind it off, turn a handle. You're just coming in here making a cut so that you've got a recess in there. Do that. You can do it with a piece of steel that you bend over, a screwdriver, something like that. So you can look at these later. I'm going to use them in the demo, and then they'll be up here for show and tell. Another tool you can get is this pointing tool. I mean, some of the guys online like it. I use one. It's nothing more than a piece of round stock that's ground on 3 sides at the end to make it pointed. It's very handy for making the chamfer whenever you're starting the threads. It's also good to use on the males for cutting the recess there between the shoulder and the threads. Nothing fancy there. Mine is a piece of rebar. It's not high carbon steel. I grind it quite often as I need it, but it's cheap. Now the armrest is another tool that's an option. You'll see a lot of turners use it. I guess in the early days, before our time, tool rests didn't rotate. They were just fixed in one position, and they needed that to get the cutter going perpendicular to the ways of the lathe. So they would put their cutter in there, hold it, and pull it into the wood. I have never found the need to really have or spend the money for that tool. I rotate my tool rest 90 degrees. That gives me enough. I can push it in there and thread fine. So someday maybe, but not right now. Let's just give you an overview how we're going to turn this. It's really basically turning a box, but we're going to cut threads for the lid and the bottom of the box. So first thing we're going to do is turn the blank into a cylinder. We're going to turn a tenon on each end, and then we're going to separate the top from the bottom, and I'm going to leave the lid in the chuck when I do that then. I'll mark on the bottom of the lid where I want to do the cutting for the female recess. Okay, so then we're going to form the threads on the female side. First thing we'll do is true up the bottom. We'll have the recess cut. Depending on the size of box, I either cut the inside out with my gouges and a box cutter, or I'll use a drill bit. The beauty of using a drill bit is that the walls are parallel, and I don't have to worry about an angle that I might have made there. So kind of depends on the size of the project. Finish the inside before you start the threading. Then we're going to cut the chamfer on the leading edge to help us get that entry. We're going to cut a recess at the back of it so that we've got a place to give a tool a little bit of slop before we hit the shoulder. So then I'll swing the tool rest around, and when we start the threading, your thread chasing tool, you don't start with the leading tooth. You start with about the second, third tooth back, and you start making that on the recess or on the chamfer. So I got the tool going, I got it cutting on the chamfer. As I get that cut and I get the motion going, I start swinging the tool around, and I'll continue the thread on in to go up the wall there for the female threads. So I'm not pushing the tool in, it's actually being pulled by the threads that we're cutting. So just a warning, it's easy enough to get a double thread. If I get a double thread, I'm not going to tell you about it, but you can use your pencil. That's why I have so many pencils, Keith, to check to see if I got a double thread going. If you do, you really don't want a double threaded lid. It's hard to get them on, get them off. You cut it off and start again. So okay, now we're going to do the male thread. We're going to hold the back, cut the chamfer, I'll cut the recess, and then it's basically the same process going through there. So there's always a question, you've cut the female threads, now you got to have the male fit over the top of that. How big do you make that tenon to make everything fit up? And so they make tools, that you can use for the inside, and then it will tell you how big to make the outside and all that. I just kind of use a rule of thumb. Really, for the 16 threads per inch that I'm going to be cutting, if I do the female threads and then the male, I will do the male about 2 millimeters bigger than what I got for the females. That's just my rule of thumb. There's also a neat little trick that once we cut that chamfer there, that I can bring the female lid up and hold it on there and do a little bit of a burn mark, and that will tell me where the crest is on the females, and I can use that as a guide for cutting my male threads. And so I think you're ready to see some wood cutting. I'm ready to cut wood. So okay, that's just same process. We'll start the tool about a 45. We just engage a couple of teeth in the middle of it. We don't start from the front tooth. Swing it around as we start cutting the thread. Okay, I'll tell you about probably the reason people don't like the thread is because you screw these things together. Okay, one, you got to fit, and now turners like to have the grain match up, and you go, well, the grain doesn't match, so what are you going to do? So you can do two things. You can either reduce the size on the female, or if you remember, you're doing 16 threads per inch. So with 16 into 1 is 0.06 inches. Is one whole thread, right? So 0.06 inches will give you 360 degrees. So you can take just a little bit of wood off the shoulder on the body of your turning to make that extra rotation. 0.06 is not a heck of a lot of wood, so you got to take it in gentle steps to see that you don't. If you overcut, then you got to go another 360 degrees to get it there. So, and you put them together. And the way you can finish, we'll finish the top by screwing it on the bottom. How do you finish the bottom? I usually expand a chuck in it because it's easier, but if we got time, I will do a female thread, screw the bottom into the female thread, and then finish the bottom that way. So those are my references. And I've never tried this, but what I'm told is that if you want a left-hand thread, instead of chasing right to left, you chase from left to right. So you can try that sometime. All right, so it's time to see if we can do what we talked about. All right, so basically we've got a block of wood. This happens to be boxwood. Does pretty well. We'll see how it goes tonight. Just did a cross on the bottom, find my center line. You guys familiar with these things? Get them at Harbor Freights. It's a little spring-loaded punch. I love them. I guess I could use an awl and do that, but that works well. It saves money. Yeah. This is boxwood. It was labeled that way from Woodcraft. It's something I had in the basement for a long time. Um, believe me, I looked at a lot of wood trying to figure out what I wanted to turn threads on tonight because I wanted something to be successful. And so I love this to start between center, step center, and just a point on a live center there. We'll see how this goes. So we're just going to knock off the edges. We're going to turn it down to around blank. I get it down close. I may not take it all the way to smooth because anytime I put it into the chuck, it's going to change it just a little bit. Got a tenon on each end. You guys work with a bidan? I love a bidan for cutting tenons. All right. Tenon's a little bit big, but it'll hold it. You know, you like to get your tenons so you got about, what, 2 millimeters, 3 millimeters between your jaws, because then you get the best grip. All right. So if you were, try not to breathe in that too much. If you're doing your box, you know, you typically go 1/3, 2/3, something like that for some kind of an aesthetic split. But when I turn these things, I tend to leave more wood down at the bottom. So I'll pretty much size this thing for where I want the lid. I want the lid to be somewhere like that. Now that may not be 1/3, 2/3, but I'll show you my reasoning when we get down there. So I'll clean up the bottom of this now. Kind of decide about, I still got to clean up the outside, so I want to leave some wood there so I got enough material to clean up. I'm not going to push it too much. I don't know, somewhere about like that. We're going to hollow out the inside. So taking the easy way out, I can use a drill bit on that. Guess you don't have to use a knockout bar there. I like that quick release, it's good. So, easy enough to put your Jacob's chuck in the tailstock. That's going to be about a match where I want to go. Take it down to about 500 RPM for drilling. So it's just a matter of how deep I want to make this recess for doing the lid. Okay, so I don't know what camera, how you guys see that. Can you see in? Can you see inside? I don't know, maybe if you could shoot like a tailstock. So that's our cut on the inside. I'm going to just clean up that bottom a little bit more. So if you don't have a square edge there, and believe me, I've learned this. I mean, if you got a goofy edge here and a goofy edge on the bottom, and you don't true them up, even if you put them together, they don't fit. So, yeah, a lot of times I will undercut just a little bit. That's so it touches on the outside and it doesn't have to touch on the inside. Yeah. So first thing I'm going to do is just turn that chamfer on the outside here. This is the point tool. You can see it's just 3 edges. So we're just going to cut the chamfer on this thing here. That's my 45-degree cut going in. So now we have to cut the recess back there for the threads. So I'm coming in here right about where that shoulder is. You see that recess that we cut? Yep. Okay. All right. So now we got to do the threads. We're going to slow it down. Slowing it down to about 300. So this is my Carter and Sons threading tool. Like I said, it's got cutters on both ends. This is going to be your female thread here. This is going to be my male thread cutter here. Everything is with a negative rake. I don't know whether you can see that. Let's see what I do, Keith. Where'd Keith go? Just take it back to neutral? Okay, all right. I don't know whether you can see that, but there is just a slight negative rake on these cutters, both on the male and the female. So, all right, so we got the chamfer there. So we want to cut somewhere just a little bit above center or at center. Got my cutters there. So I'm going to start down with about the second, third tooth. Just start going across that chamfer. Once I can see the threads develop. Can you see that thread develop? Oh, you got good camera coverage. We're doing good. All right. So now I'm going to just bring my tool around and I'm going to just kind of keep going inside. Yeah, I'm starting at about a 45. That wasn't good, was it? Sometimes you get those little notches cut in there and it's a pain in the butt. Sometimes you have to just start over too. So. Those are developing. They're not. It's not a very clean cut. Um, this super glue. When the wood's kind of punky and all that, it helps some. Probably something like ebony or ironwood or anything that's really hard. I mean, that piece of, I don't know whether it's cocobolo or one of those. Those exotics just turn beautiful, or just thread beautifully. PVC. This is where I say, make sure that thing is set. Yeah. Well, I got pieces up there, cherry and walnut. It depends on your wood sometimes. Yeah, sometimes when you're cutting these threads too, if you can use a little bit of beeswax or anything like that. It never ceases to amaze me that these things just tend to go to the same thread. I mean, they just jump right in. The arm tool would be useful. It would help you maintain that. I do it all sideways with just my finger coming in and keeping it on the side. But yeah. Yeah, but once you get it in that thread, it will pull it in. You're not pushing it in. You're letting the cutter, the chaser, do all the work. So we're going to call that good. We'll see how it works. I don't know. They're not the best threads, but basically at this point I would go ahead and finish the inside, and pretty much complete the inside of the lid. The outside, we're going to turn it later when we hook it up to the bottom. So now you put the bottom in, just like we did before. I'm going to true up that face a little bit. So, I keep track of my parts here. This was what we cut for the internal threads for the female. And if I measure that with my calipers, I get about 43 millimeters. So I'm going to do 45 out here. Bring the left one in. So whenever the left one and the right one align, then that's about where we want to go. All right. So that should be about what I want the male thread to be. Take it down to that. Give a little bit of taper there at the edge. So I'm going to just hold this up here. Get a little bit of a burn mark. So that tells me about where that crest is going to be on the male thread. So it's pretty darn close to what I measured. I'm going to try to get those flat across there. I can tell from looking at my female, she's not parallel on the sides. Sort of got a pipe thread going. So we got the male going started. First thing we're going to do, we got the end squared off. I'm going to put that chamfer right here. And then I need to put the recess in. Recess between the shoulder and the threads. So I'll come in here with parallel to the base. A little bit of a recess there. All right. It is. So this was our female cutter. So now we're just going to turn it around and use the male cutter. I'm running 277. All right, same thing. We're going to start, but not with the lead tooth, but somewhere back 2 or 3. Get it established. I love cutting male threads. They cut so much easier than females. Gee. All right. It's going to fit one way or the other. Nah, not quite. Too tight. All right. So what we do when it's too tight, you trim the crest off and go again.
Is it too much to take off with the thread cutter?
Yeah. Once you're down, you've cut the full depth of those threads, it's hard to force it anymore. So you just take the crest off. Once again, start on the chamfer, establish your thread. The reason it's not going in real well is because the female was not done real good. I don't know if you can tell, but I got an angle to that. You can see that it's tapered like that. The walls are not straight. Plus, I don't have real good threads right here at the first. Bear with me a minute. I think she'll still fit. Yeah, we're going to blame the female threads. All right, here we go. Well, we'll say that they screw together. Well, it does get tight, so it does attach the thread. Granted, they don't grab right from the start, but let me have the bottom back, and you guys can keep the top if you want for a little bit, or I'll just take them both. All right. So, yeah. So the reason I said that I don't do the 1/3, 2/3 when I start is that once I get this far, and if I've screwed up the threads so that they don't work at all, I'll just cut this whole thing off, cut me another little tenon here, and just keep going until I have some success or enough that I can call it quits. And then I go, okay, well, now I got threads cut. I'll decide on how big or how long I want the box. I'll part off the bottom, and it's no big deal. So the way we can do this, we covered it in the slides, but we would have the bottom set up. Use that just as a chuck. So now we can go ahead and finish the top, do some shaping on the bottom. And you notice that I didn't hollow out the bottom yet. That's another reason I don't hollow out the bottom at the very start, is because if I shorten it up and I keep going, it gives me a little bit more freedom on what I want to do with the bottom. So the other thing you can do, if you have good thread, it's not going to jump off like that. But I also use the magic of taping those two together so that, yeah. This wood is much punkier than I thought it was going to be. So once you get the lid the way you want it to go, take the lid off. You'd be surprised how tight that gets sometimes. And then this is where I can go back and I can hollow the bottom, turn it into a regular box. How are we doing on time? So what I would do then is I would cut me a female thread in a scrap piece of wood that matches the male thread. So I'd cut this, thread this, screw this into here, finish off the bottom, and you're ready to go. Most of the time, I mean, that's the ideal way to go, but what I tend to do a lot of times is just take a smaller set of jaws, expand chuck, expand into the bottom of the base, hold it, finish up the bottom, and you're good to go. So.